You're welcome to ask another question if you'd like to.
I'll ask
on a
you.
different subject.
I'll ask you about Iraq. Efforts to curtail the deployment of troops is an ongoing debate right now. One of the things you spoke about in your address last week had to do with impatience with the Iraqi government, and you spoke about that, but not in much detail. How is that dynamic changing, your level of frustration with the lack of political progress, and how long can Americans reasonably expect you to wait before you take some kind of action that really forces the Iraqi government's hand to reach the goals of reconciliation that you set for them?
In my speech, I made it clear that there has to be a change in security for there to be reconciliation. And I also said that progress will yield fewer troops. In other words, return on success. That's what I said. There are two types of reconciliation, David. One is that reconciliation that's very visible reconciliation that happens through the passage of law. In other words, it's reconciliation that shows the Iraqi people that people from different backgrounds can get along, and at the same time that government can function. Clearly, there needs to be work there. In other words, there needs to be the passage of law. For example, we strongly believe that an oil revenue sharing law will send a message to Sunni, Shia, and Kurd alike that there is an effort at the national level to achieve reconciliation. Having said that, however, there is a functioning government. And the reason I bring, I guess my point is this, that in spite of the fact they haven't passed the law, there is the sharing of oil revenues on a relatively equitable basis. The other, and so we'll continue to work with the government to insist and impress upon them the need for there to be the passage of law, whether it be provincial election laws or debathification law or the oil law. There is local reconciliation taking place. I had a fascinating conversation in the Roosevelt Room earlier this week with members of provincial reconstruction teams from around Iraq who talked about how people are sick and tired of murder and violence, and that they expect their local governments and their central government to be more responsive to their needs, and local governments are beginning to respond. Part of the reason why there's not this kind of instant democracy in Iraq is because people are still recovering from Saddam Hussein's brutal rule. I thought an interesting comment was made when somebody said to me, I heard somebody say, where's Mandela? Well, Mandela's dead because Saddam Hussein killed all the Mandelas. He was a brutal tyrant that divided people up and split families, and people are recovering from this. So there's a psychological recovery that is taking place, and it's hard work for him, and I understand it's hard work for him. Having said that, I'm not going to give him a pass when it comes to the central government's reconciliation efforts. I also said in my speech, local politics will drive national politics, and I believe that. I believe as more reconciliation takes place at the local level, you'll see a more responsive central government.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Defense Secretary, Robert Gates, was recently asked by New York Times columnist David Brooks if knowing what he knows now, invading Iraq was a good idea. And I believe your Defense Secretary answered, I don't know. Does that represent daylight with you? Is that second guessing? Have you spoken to the Defense Secretary? And has that changed your mind at all?
I think he made it pretty clear the removal of Saddam, I don't know about this column, but I know his previous statements, he said getting rid of Saddam Hussein was the right decision. But I haven't talked to him about the column. If I had to ask everybody in my government to respond to columns and news stories, that's all I'd be doing, is talking to people in my government. I am absolutely convinced Secretary Gates knows that removing Saddam was the right thing, and I'm absolutely convinced he believes we will succeed in Iraq. And so I've got a lot of trust in the man. He's doing a fine job as the Secretary. Martha.